Welcome to the deep dive. Glad you're joining us.
Hey, everyone.
Today we're pulling back the curtain on something quite specific, but really important for some pet owners and breeders. Pyruvate Kinase Deficiency.
Yeah, PK-DEF for short. And we've been, digging into some solid sources, detailed articles, study guides. They really lay out the science and the clinical side of this genetic condition.
Right. And our mission today is to sort of unpack all that, figure out what PK-DEF actually is, which animals tend to get it, how it's diagnosed,
Whoa.
what living with it involves, and crucially, why understanding the genetics behind it is just so vital.
Absolutely. So where do we start? The basics.
Let's start right at the beginning, at the cellular level. Red blood cells, their main job, obviously, carrying oxygen.
Yep.
And like any cell, they need energy ATP to function, to stay healthy, just to survive.
Okay, got it. Energy currency.
Exactly. But here's the interesting bit. Mature red blood cells, they don't have mitochondria.
Right. The usual power plants aren't there. Correct. So they have this one main way to make ATP, a process called anaerobic glycolysis. It's their only energy factory, essentially.
One specialized pathway.
Precisely. And pyruvate kinase, PK, it's a key enzyme in this pathway. It kind of controls the flow and helps generate that crucial ATP.
Okay, so if that enzyme, PK, is deficient, the factory's output drops. Not enough energy.
You got it. The whole energy metabolism inside the red blood cell gets seriously impaired. They just can't produce enough ATP to maintain their shape, their flexibility, their function.
And what's the consequence of that energy shortage?
Well, those energy-starved red blood cells become fragile. They break down and die much, much sooner than they should. Their lifespan is cut short.
Leading to anemia.
Exactly, anemia. You're losing red blood cells faster than the body can replace them, so you don't have enough healthy cells carrying oxygen around.
Okay, but the body must react somehow, right? It doesn't just let that happen.
Oh, absolutely. The bone marrow, the red blood cell factory, kicks into high gear, starts pumping out loads of new, immature red blood cells to try and compensate.
Which is what vets call a regenerative anemia.
That's the one. You see lots of these young cells, called reticulocytes, in the blood. The body is trying.
So fundamentally, it's an energy crisis within the red blood cell that causes them to self-destruct, leading to this chronic anemia picture. Now, you said it's genetic. Who are the animals typically affected by this?
Yes, and this is really where owners and breeders need to tune in. PK-DEF is inherited. It's an autosomal recessive trait.
Okay, recessive, meaning an animal needs to inherit 2 copies of the faulty gene, one from each parent.
That's exactly right. 2 copies to actually show symptoms. And the sources we looked at list specific breeds known to carry this mutation.
Which ones are we talking about?
For dogs, it includes Basenjis, Beagles, Westies, West Highland White Terriers, Cairn Terriers, miniature poodles, Dachshunds, Chihuahuas, Pugs, American Eskimos, and Labs, Labrador Retrievers.
Wow, that's quite a mix. Small dogs, big dogs.
It is. And for cats, it's seen in Abyssinians, Somalis, some domestic Shorthairs, Bengals, and Maine Coons.
Okay, so affected animals have those 2 copies. What about animals that only get 1 copy? The carriers.
The carriers. This is super important.
Yeah.
Carriers have 1 normal gene and 1 mutated gene. Usually they produce enough PK enzyme, maybe around 50% of normal levels.
And that's enough for them to be healthy?
Typically, yes. They usually show no signs of the disease themselves. They appear completely normal.
But they can still pass that mutated gene on to their offspring, the hidden danger.
Precisely. And that's why genetic testing is so incredibly important. It's not just about identifying sick animals. It's about finding these healthy carriers before they're bred. It's crucial for responsible breeding.
Makes total sense. Okay, so let's say an animal is affected. It has the 2 bad genes. What does this actually look like day to day? What signs might an owner see?
Well, the signs can start showing up pretty young, like a few months old, but sometimes not until they're adults. And it can be variable. Sometimes the signs might seem to come and go.
Okay, so what are the classic signs linked to that chronic anemia?
The big ones are usually lethargy, just seeming tired, low energy, and exercise intolerance. Maybe they can't keep up on walks or tire out really quickly during play.
That makes sense. Less oxygen getting around.
Exactly. You might also notice pale mucous membranes.
Like checking their gums or inside the eyelids, and they look pale pink or even whitish instead of a healthy pink.
Yes, that's a common one. Another finding that pops up frequently in the sources is splenomegaly.
An enlarged spleen. We mentioned that earlier because it's working hard cleaning up damaged cells.
That's the idea. It gets enlarged from filtering out all those fragile red blood cells. You might also notice a faster heart rate, tachycardia, as the heart tries to compensate.
For the reduced oxygen delivery.
Right. And sometimes, especially in dogs apparently, a heart murmur can develop.
What about jaundice, that yellowing?
Icterus or jaundice, yes. It can happen due to the breakdown products of red blood cells building up. The sources say it's actually seen a bit more often in affected cats than dogs, interestingly.
Are there other, maybe less common signs?
Yeah, there can be. Affected dogs might sometimes be a bit smaller than their litter mates, maybe show some muscle weakness or wasting. Cats might have ongoing issues like diarrhea, poor appetite, maybe a dull coat, weight loss. And in really chronic cases, because the bone marrow is constantly stimulated, you can sometimes see changes like increased bone density. Dark urine can happen too, from bilirubin spillover. Oh, and potentially increased susceptibility to infections.
So it really sounds like a spectrum. It could be quite mild, almost unnoticeable sometimes, or it could be really severe life-altering disease.
Absolutely. It ranges from mild, maybe intermittent anemia that's manageable, right up to severe chronic anemia that's life-threatening.
Okay. So given that wide range of signs and the fact that many could point to other conditions, how do veterinarians actually pin down PK-DEF as the cause? Diagnosis must be a process.
It definitely is. You don't just jump to PK-DEF. The first step is usually ruling out other, maybe more common causes of hemolytic anemia. That's anemia where red cells are being destroyed.
Like what sort of things?
Well, things like immune-mediated hemolytic anemia, where the body attacks its own red cells, or certain infections, like blood parasites, even toxins. And then there are other rare genetic things like Pyruvate Kinase Deficiency, which also affects glycolysis in dogs.
So how might PK-DEF look different from some of those on initial tests? Are there clues?
There can be. For instance, the Coombs test, which checks for immune attack on red cells, would typically be negative in PK-DEF. You would expect to see parasites on a blood smear or certain abnormal cell shapes like Heinz bodies that you see with some toxins.
Right.
And differentiating it from that other enzyme deficiency in dogs, phospholipid kinase deficiency, that's important. PK-deficient dogs usually don't have those sudden crises of intravascular hemolysis where cells burst inside the blood vessels, spilling hemoglobin into the plasma and urine. That's more typical of the other one. But confirming the difference needs specific tests.
Okay, so standard lab work, blood counts, chemistry panels, what do they usually show?
The CBC, complete blood count, will obviously show the anemia. Often the red cells that are present are larger than normal, but paler, macrocytic, hypochromic. The overall red cell count, the hematocrit, will be low, sometimes persistently low.
And you mentioned the high reticulocyte count, the young cells.
Yes, very high reticulocyte counts, showing that bone marrow is responding, even if it's not enough. You might see other variations in red cell shape and size too, especially if the spleen's been removed. White blood cells and platelets are often normal, maybe slightly high sometimes.
And the chemistry panel, what clues there?
You often see elevated bilirubin, that breakdown product, causing the jaundice sometimes. Iron levels can actually be high because it's released from the destroyed cells, maybe mild elevations in liver enzymes. Cats might have high protein levels, specifically globulins. Dogs in later stages might show low albumin if the liver is failing.
In urine.
Usually pretty normal, although you might detect bilirubin in the urine in dogs sometimes.
Okay, those are all suggestive signs, but how do you get the definitive diagnosis? Confirm it's actually the PK enzyme.
Well, the direct way is to measure the pyruvate kinase enzyme activity in the red blood cells themselves. If that activity is clearly low, especially in cats, that's pretty diagnostic.
Pretty straightforward for cats then. But you mentioned dogs were tricky?
Ah, yes. Here's the kicker for dogs. Many affected dogs, when you run the standard PK activity assay, their levels come back normal, or sometimes even high.
Wait, what? How? If they're deficient?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? It's because these affected dogs start making a different form, an isoenzyme of PK in their red blood cells, one that isn't normally there in mature red cells. This other form gets picked up by the standard test and gives a falsely normal or high reading, masking the real deficiency.
Oh, wow, that's confusing. So how do you diagnose it in dogs then, if the main test can be misleading?
You need more specialized tests if that initial activity isn't clearly low. Things like looking at enzyme stability or measuring other chemicals in the glycolysis pathway, or even separating out the different enzyme forms. But these are often limited to research or specialized labs.
That sounds complicated. Is there a simpler, more definitive way now?
Thankfully, yes, DNA testing. This has been a game changer. There are now genetic tests available that look for the specific known mutations causing PK-DEF in the affected breeds.
Ah, looking directly at the genetic blueprint.
Exactly. It's the gold standard. It confirms the diagnosis in an animal showing signs, and crucially, it identifies those healthy carriers we talked about earlier.
And presumably DNA testing is much more widely available and easier to access than those complex enzyme assays.
Generally, yes. Many labs offer these breed-specific DNA tests. It's really the key tool now for both diagnosis and for controlling the disease through responsible breeding.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's say an animal is diagnosed. What happens next? How do you manage PK-DEF? What's the treatment plan?
Well, the tough part, according to our sources, is that there isn't really a widely available cure right now.
No magic pill then?
Unfortunately not. So management is all about supportive care. The goal is to manage the symptoms, minimize crises, and maintain the best possible quality of life for the animal.
What does that supportive care look like?
A major component can be blood transfusions. If the anemia becomes severe, life-threateningly low, transfusions are needed to boost their red cell count temporarily.
To get them through a crisis.
Exactly. Oxygen therapy might also be used during severe anemic episodes. And good nutrition is important, a high-quality diet. But there's a really important point about supplements.
Let me guess. Iron.
You got it. Iron supplementation is generally not recommended and can actually be harmful.
Why is that? Because their bodies already have too much iron from all the broken down red cells.
Precisely. They're prone to iron overload, which can damage organs, especially the liver. So adding more iron is usually counterproductive and potentially dangerous.
Okay, good to know. What about other medications? Steroids, maybe?
Steroids or other immunosuppressants might sometimes be tried, maybe if there's a suspicion of some immune component complicating things, but they don't fix the underlying PK-DEF problem, and their effectiveness is limited. Antibiotics are often necessary, though, because these animals can be more vulnerable to picking up secondary infections.
Right. You mentioned splenectomy, removing the spleen earlier. Is that used as part of management?
It can be, particularly in cats. Removing the spleen can sometimes lessen the severity of the anemia because you're removing a primary site where those fragile red cells are getting destroyed.
But it's major surgery.
It is. It's a decision that needs careful consideration, weighing the potential benefits against the risks for that individual animal.
What about more advanced options? I think bone marrow transplant was mentioned in the sources.
Yes, bone marrow transplantation is then performed, particularly in dogs. If it's successful, it can potentially cure the disease by replacing the faulty blood-forming cells with healthy ones from a donor.
A potential cure. That sounds promising.
It is, but it's a very complex, high-risk procedure. It requires a suitable donor, it's very expensive, and it's only available at highly specialized veterinary centers. So it's not a routine option by any means.
Right, limited accessibility and high stakes. Any research into things like gene therapy?
The sources mention gene therapy as an area of research, a potential future direction. But again, that's not something available clinically right now. It's still in the experimental stages.
So putting it all together, what's the general prognosis, the long-term outlook for an animal diagnosed with PK-DEF?
It really varies depending on the severity of the disease in that individual.
Makes sense.
Animals that have a milder form, maybe with intermittent signs, they might live a relatively normal lifespan with good supportive care and management.
But for the more severe cases?
For animals with severe chronic anemia, the prognosis is much more guarded, unfortunately, often poor.
What are the main complications that tend to limit their lifespan in those severe cases?
In dogs especially, two major long-term complications are often the problem. One is that hepatic iron overload we talked about, the excess iron damaging the liver, potentially leading to cirrhosis and liver failure over time.
Okay.
The other is related to the bone marrow working so hard for so long. Eventually it can become scarred and fibrous, that's called myelofibrosis, and less able to produce cells. You can also get increased bone density, osteosclerosis. Essentially, the marrow starts to fail.
So the body's own compensatory mechanisms eventually cause more problems down the line.
In a way, yes. The sources indicate that many severely affected dogs sadly don't live past about 5 years of age, often succumbing to either liver failure or bone marrow failure.
Are there specific signs that suggest an animal might be entering that terminal stage?
Yes, things like the anemia becoming profound and the bone marrow showing less and less ability to respond so, low reticulocyte counts despite severe anemia, also worsening liver function tests and eventually signs of liver failure, like ascites, which is fluid buildup in the abdomen due to low protein levels.
And cats. Any specific long-term issues mentioned for them?
The sources mentioned reports of some cats developing blockages in their bile ducts due to gallstones made of bilirubin.
Okay. But just circling back to the bone marrow transplant, if that is an option and it's successful, that really changes the prognosis picture.
Absolutely. If an animal successfully undergoes a bone marrow transplant, it has the potential for a normal lifespan, free from the effects of PK-death.
Hmm.
It's the closest thing to a cure currently possible, albeit with those significant hurdles.
Right. So given how serious this can be and the fact that it's inherited, prevention seems absolutely key. How do we stop this from being cast on?
It all comes back to the genetics. Prevention is centered entirely on identifying animals that carry the mutated gene and making informed, responsible breeding decisions.
Which means genetic testing again.
Exactly. Genetic testing is the cornerstone of prevention and control. Breeders in affected breeds absolutely need to test their breeding stock.
And once they have those results, what's the responsible path forward?
The guidelines are pretty clear. Animals that test as affected, with 2 copies of the mutation, should not be bred. And critically, animals that test as carriers, with 1 copy, should not be bred to other carriers.
Because that pairing has a high risk of producing affected puppies or kittens.
Precisely. A carrier could potentially be bred to a clear animal, one with no copies of the mutation, as that won't produce affected offspring, only more carriers or clears. But ideally, the goal is to gradually reduce the frequency of the mutation in the breed population over time. Genetic counseling can be really helpful for breeders navigating these decisions.
Wow. Okay. We've certainly covered a lot of ground today on pyruvate kinase deficiency,
We really have, from the fundamental energy problem inside a single type of cell,
all the way through to the complex multi-system effects like liver and bone marrow failure.
and landing on the critical role of genetics, both in causing the disease and in offering the tools to prevent it.
Yeah, the key takeaways seem pretty clear. PK-DEF. It's a serious inherited condition primarily affecting certain breeds. It causes chronic anemia, can lead to severe complications.
But importantly, genetic testing provides a powerful way to identify affected animals and carriers, which is essential for stopping its spread through responsible breeding.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is in biology, doesn't it? Understanding this one tiny enzyme's job, or lack thereof, in a red blood cell unfolds this whole complex story impacting the entire animal.
It absolutely does. And it also shows how far veterinary medicine and particularly genetics have advanced. We now have the tools not just for diagnosis, but to actively manage the genetic health of breeds.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the power of understanding these intricate biological pathways. And maybe, just maybe, where future genetic research might lead not just in preventing diseases like PK-DEF, but potentially finding novel ways to treat or even cure other complex conditions down the road. Food for thought.